around with small grain like oats or something like that at all?
Here in Western New York?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's a few guys that just basically started here a couple of days ago. We got a little warm weather, but it's supposed to be a little warmer here next week, so you'll see some guys try to plant some alfalfa.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Gotcha. But were you wet last fall? I mean, did you go into the fall wet?
Yes, we did. We did. I'd say 90% of our corn and soybeans on tracks, and we kind of made a mess. So it's going to take a while to dry it out. So,
did you have those tracks, or did you have to go buy them?
No, we've always had tracks. That's been kind of like our crop insurance. We've always run rubber tracks, and last fall we needed them.
Now, do you take those off in a normal year and put tires back on?
Well, describe to me a normal year, and I'll let you know.
Okay, I understand.
No, we leave them on all the time.
Yeah, okay.
You guys ready to get going?
Whenever you're ready, Zachy.
Sounds good. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to the April 19 conference call with growers. I'm Zach Smith. I'm from Ontario. I work under Jim as assistant to the Director of Research, and I'll be moderating these calls from here on out. We're just going to do the winter, but we've decided to do, I think, permanent. So this call will be split up a little bit. Jim's going to come on once I'm done this little introduction, and he's going to talk about markets, and I'm sure, knowing Jim, a few other things too. And then we're going to bring Bruce Naas on. He was on in February as well, and he's got a picture in the calendar this month that shows him spraying foliar feeding lima beans. So we'll be discussing that some, and then for those of you that got the sales letter, we put a question in there. Bruce is finding it difficult to make a profit on his corn and beans for a variety of reasons, and he and I'm sure many others are interested in specific ways that you guys are handling and managing growing your corn and beans as to make a profit, to reduce costs and such. So any input is appreciated. We'll be doing that after we talk about the lima beans. I hope it's a good discussion. So to start, Jim, if you want to take the wheel and discuss markets and stuff like that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks, Zach. My name is Jim Hallbeisen, and I've been working or hosting the conference call, and while I was gone last winter, traveling around doing the meetings, Zach took over for me, and we've got a couple pictures coming up that are going to be basically Zach's forte, so I think we're going to let Zach kind of take control of the conference call, but my goal is to get on and try to give you guys some perspective of what we're seeing out in the field. And I think this last winter traveling, the biggest shock to me was the condition of the soil everywhere we went. Usually, we span basically from the Dakotas, across Ontario, and then John Sensenik is working up in Massachusetts and then that goes all the way down to the Carolinas, to South Georgia, and then we come over into Alabama and then work our way back north again. But usually we get into areas or pockets where it might be super wet, and then other areas will be super dry. Everywhere I went this winter, everybody was wet. Just seemed that they went into the fall harvest wet. Our guys down south especially were wet as anybody and struggled with it. Even with the hurricanes, they still had a lot of wet weather. And I was talking with one of our southern customers today and just saying that there was a lot of cotton that was abandoned. It was too wet. The insurance company told them mow it off because the gin people didn't want it. The quality of it was absolutely terrible. So, but anywhere I was, that's all guys were really complaining about. They just wanted to get it over with because of, the struggles with harvest particularly. So again, now the gentleman down south, he's got his corn planted. He's going to be working on his peanuts next week. He said hopefully by the end of the month, then he'll get into cotton. And he says that's kind of typical for their goal. He said it's dried out here in the last 6 weeks, 2 months from what they were in the fall. So they're kind of back on a normal schedule. The rest of the country, I'm sure everybody's aware of what's happening up in Minnesota and South Dakota and Wisconsin. Actually, when they had that first bomb cyclone up there, it was when I went to Wisconsin, the number of roofs that were caved in was kind of amazing to me. And we had guys up there who had offspring that were making a living cleaning off roofs because of the weight of the material and how much snow they were getting. And see, now they're getting another taste of that thing, and that's going to be problematic for those guys. And just the addition of the water, with the flooding, we've got a couple contacts, Nebraska, western Iowa, and they're just saying that the flooding in there, the devastation has just been unbelievable. And see, everybody is just looking at each other, wondering what these markets are trying to do. It seems like the government is just pretty well set on it with the numbers they're putting out, what they released Tuesday. They cut the corn usage. They're predicting the corn acres to go up and dropping the bean acres because beans have struggled here. And so they're saying we're just going to have such a fantastic volume of acres that even if we lose a bunch of corn, which our Nebraska contact said we definitely did, there was, a loss of both corn and beans. They couldn't get out of the bin, and this has not affected prices whatsoever. So it's really mystifying. And so I think now the weather thing is going to have to be whether we get a delay in the planting of the crop to try to get any rally on these prices. And see, the other thing that they're using as a weapon against us is this hog situation. Those guys were telling us there was a fair number of hogs that got killed with that first bomb cyclone, and when the Missouri was flooding in there, that they just couldn't get the animals, out of the facility, and they basically drowned it in there. And a couple days after that happened, hogs went up the limit. Well, now they're saying, okay, you're going to have that loss of numbers, so the usage of corn is going to go down pretty significantly. And then they're also saying that this African swine fever thing in China has really put a ding in their population over there. So even if we fix this tariff thing with China, that the demand is going to be down quite significantly. So right away the traders are running for the door on corn. So I think now the decision is going to be, are the acres really going to be there? Are guys going to be willing to take the gamble? If you look at the popular websites like AgWeb and DTN, excuse me, those farmers are saying, that they're going to jack their corn acres. Well, we've had a few bad days here on corn, so we'll have to see if that holds true, or if they back off of that a little bit and go back to more beans. That's going to be the big question, and I think the government is pretty well showed their colors on this, that they're basically trying to control this price, because I think they're quite concerned about the economy itself it's doing very well, but they've got to keep a control on this interest rate, because the debt load overall in the economy is very high, and they just can't let this thing run to the moon. And that would be devastating for agriculture too, if this interest rate would really take off with the kind of issues that we're dealing with. And really we can't find anything. In my travels, it looks like some of the vegetables, cabbage, for example, guys were very happy with that as far as cash flow was concerned, although the guys I'm talking with, the acres of cabbage seems to be going up. So we'll see if that has any effect on the total market. And then here in the U.S., and even talking with the guys in Canada, the labor situation is going to be a big issue as far as vegetables are concerned. And we've had some of those issues within the company ourselves, trying to deal with what the politicians are doing at the border, and how they're going to control some of this stuff. And that'll be dinging away at some of the labor pool that guys are using, not only in vegetables but in livestock, with dairymen also, that are hiring labor that are coming offshore, or migrant labor, to do some of the jobs that they normally had done in the family. So the thing right now, I think, is the volume of corn, and then the perspective of a big acreage number on corn, I think, is going to kind of put the lid on that thing. And I just don't see that it can do a whole lot unless we get some kind of help from the weather. And there's a little bit of that. If you look at the long-term forecast, they're still saying that with this Easter being late as it is, that they don't expect this temperature to really start getting any traction. Now, one thing I notice in our neighborhood, that even though it's been cool, the water has been getting away pretty good. Like, the water tables are starting to drop a little bit, and that's pretty interesting, because we were like everybody else. It was very wet this fall, kind of struggled, with harvest to a certain degree. And the fact that this water is getting away the way it is kind of interesting, because when you looked at it in November, going into Thanksgiving time last year, it seemed like a quagmire no matter where you went. And so even the lighter soil was pretty wet. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting to the fact that it's drying out. So I talked with Dave Prater down in central Illinois, and he said, there's a few guys down by St. Louis that have done a little scratching around and planting some corn, but he said it's kind of sandy down in that area. He said out in their area of the state, which is more central of Illinois, he says it's still wet and cold. And he said the forecast over the weekend doesn't look for a whole lot of warming either. That blizzard thing, it's pinwheeling around, and it's going to bring some cold air even down into their area. And usually by this time of year, some of those guys will be done planting corn. So it's slowing them down. And see, this is how far that goes will have some effect. But see, the rate that guys can plant corn at, the market never gets worried about it, because guys can sock it in so fast with 36-year-old planters, and you can get a lot of work done. So I think it has to be, something monumental. And then whether we get any kind of excessive heat or dry weather when we get into pollination, that'll be the second time when we'll see if there'll be any help from it. But one thing that I would like to comment on, traveling around this winter with guys, they're looking at this starter thing a little bit different than in the past. It's been kind of a weak sister as far as the total fertility program is concerned. In other words, a lot of guys they got a certain amount of P and K that they're bulk spreading, and then they're just kind of touching away at the starter. And more guys are starting to look at that totally different, trying to get rid of this P and K addition and come in with more starter. But in total, the amount of applied nutrient is come down quite significantly. And see, the publications that Ferry has been shooting out there, which came in December, and then another one in February, talking about getting these plants off to a better start, particularly corn. The seed companies have always talked about, your rows around and kernels per row are pretty well set by 10 leaf. And Ferry is suggesting that when the plant is emerging, that process is already starting. So that if you do have a stress period in there as the plant is emerging out of the soil, that you can take the top end off of that genetics quite significantly. In other words, he's saying that most cobs are putting out 650, 700 kernels per cob, and he said if you go through too much stress getting that plant to come out of the ground, that it can drop back to 500, 450, 400. And he said, your potential for entrapment of energy goes down quite significantly. And see, I think some guys are thinking that this is a way to try to trim some costs a little bit, try to get rid of that bulk application, get that money into the starter material, and then see what you can do there. But a lot of guys have already, used that approach, and so the only other places that I'm hearing guys talking about trimming are genetics. In other words, they're going to Rural King to get their corn rather than buying it from Pioneer, and they're cutting that cost almost in half. And everybody says, well, you're not going to get the potential, but these guys are saying that they feel the yield is very competitive. And see, I think a guy's got to look at realistically what is his potential yield. Yeah, if you get great weather, it can be pretty big, but how often do you get that great weather? So I think if that cheaper corn has the potential to max out in your normal weather, I think that's got some real potential. And then a lot of guys are questioning all this add-on stuff, like the fungicide, for example. Do we really need that? And again, everybody's got to make that decision on what type of weather they normally work with. You get in the east, you guys are a little bit wetter, so that's going to be something that maybe you figure you got to have. But we got guys in the Midwest that are saying that they don't think they're going to follow that anymore, because some cases these fungicides you're looking at $35 an acre just for the fungicide. So again, with corn being where it's at, that you're cutting a fine line there. And I think populations are another issue. Guys are whittling on that population to try to get the volume of the seed purchase down, trying to cut on that. And then from the herbicide standpoint, the problem is with this weed resistance, guys want to get away from just, the Roundup spray and go to a pre-merge, but, that drives the cost up right away. So again, the herbicide issue has been quite a battle as far as cost is concerned, especially if you want to use the genetically modified for any escapes. A lot of guys will buy Roundup corn and not use Roundup and pre-merge, so that if they do have an escape, they've got the option of coming back with the Roundup. But again, that starts driving the cost up again. So some of those guys are saying, I'm not gonna live with that. I'm basically going to count on my pre-merge to cover it and then buy the cheaper corn. And that's a big approach that we're starting to see. Some guys are trying to capture value on that non-GMO seed, but again, that gets into a real circus too. Some places are testing, and there's a lot of questions on how good the test actually is. So that leads to another problem. So I think again, from the guys I'm talking with, the seed thing is where a lot of guys are trying to whittle back on their costs. And then again, we've got land cost, rental cost, equipment cost. All that becomes an issue as far as what do you got to ante up on this stuff to make those payments. And see that dings away when the commodity is down. So I think that's another area that guys are wondering, if they can do some whittling there too. When you got yourself geared up to do something, you hate to back away from that, but again, the cost factor can be fairly steep. So I think from the grower standpoint, a lot of our guys are looking at using more upfront material. Guys are looking at the 2x2 thing. In other words, they want to get so much going, early in the season, and some guys are putting it all directly on the seed and got away with it and like it. Some guys want to try to they want to go more, but they don't want to stick it all on the seed, so they're sticking some of it over 2x2 and then lightening that seed amount up with the idea that they get enough on to get the roots over to the 2x2 position and then try to get the plant bigger. And some guys are talking about walking away from the foliar application at that point. Well, again, I don't do that. In other words, I do some of that 2x2, but I still save enough to do some foliar feeding because, again, if you get into hot, dry weather, I think that foliar can really get those roots to protrude more and get them searching for you. And so maybe you can whittle a little out of the foliage and put it in the front end. That's what some guys are talking about doing. So again, that we get a lot of different versions of what guys are looking to do, basically. So that's pretty well what I've seen on the road, Zach. So I don't know if I took up too much time or not. So I don't want to take away from what Bruce is up to.
No, not at all. Thanks, Jim. Bruce, you're good to go? I'll introduce you a little bit. Well, I'll let you introduce yourself for the most part, but so Bruce he's a grower in Western New York. He's been on growers for quite a while, though I don't remember exactly how long. He grows corn and beans, but the bulk of his growth is veggies. As you can see, the lima beans in the picture from April. Bruce, if you could introduce yourself, and then we'll get into the lima bean stuff, the picture. But there's probably quite a few different people from February, if you don't mind kind of talking about what you grow, how long you've been on the program, how you use it, stuff like that, please.
Well, we grow about 1,800 acres just outside of Buffalo, between Buffalo and Rochester, and about 450 to 500 acres is vegetables. It's all for canning or processing. It's all machine harvested. Corn, sweet corn, lima beans, snap beans, spinach, peas, and then we fill in the blanks with several hundred acres of corn and maybe 500 acres of soybeans. The vegetables have been the thing in the last couple of years. It's done the best for us, and that's where we've kind of figured it out through trial and error, using growers on the vegetables to kind of spoon feed them. We've been forced to kind of use a lot of fungicides because of the weather. So every time the sprayer crosses the field, it's got some liquid fertilizer in it, and we always spray in the evening. And so far, we've had success. Doesn't matter what crop, we put a little in there, and away we go. If we're going to spend the money for the application, well, let's get the most bang out of our buck.
How long have you been using growers then?
Grandfather used it back in the 70s, and we've always had it, always used it. So I guess I can say sometime in the 70s.
Okay, good. I was talking to you just a little bit earlier, Bruce. You'd said that you guys rent most of that 1,800, right?
Yeah, we rent about 15 of the 1,800.
Have you used any lime on the rented ground? I presume you have on your owned. Yeah,
we have. When we have a relatively long-term lease, we use lime. We use a lot of gypsum too. On the rented ground that we grow the vegetables on, we're very aggressive with the lime. Or if it's a one-shot deal, if we're swapping with another neighbor, we'll use some gypsum. Anything to try to get some more steam, so to speak, out of these vegetable crops, because they're such a short day crop. They can't have a bad day. They really got to grow. So we're trying every avenue.
Hey Bruce, what do you on gypsum? What kind of rates are you using?
Well, it's kind of a tough thing because gypsum being kind of a wet product, kind of sticks in a spreader. So you're trying to. I'm not saying vary the amount, but you kind of do the best you can. So for me to say we're putting on, say, 500 pounds the acre or something like that, it's up and down. Like for any type of our snap bean or lima beans, we really try to be aggressive right up front and work it in.
Mm-hmm. What are you paying for gypsum? Now, is that a mined product? It's not a byproduct?
No. It's a byproduct. I say that sometimes. It depends. Sometimes it's a byproduct from the acetylene industry.
Okay.
And sometimes you can buy it reasonable, and sometimes as it wears on price-wise, it gets a little more expensive. But the price is kind of all over the board.
Have you ever tried to mix them? We've got guys in the South that have done that, and now I got some guys out in the Midwest that are this gypsoil company has come along, and guys are able to get gypsum a little easier. And those guys in the South have been mixing it for quite a number of years, and they've got some pretty decent calcium down there, and they're pretty happy with that mixing activity. Have you ever done any of that? In other words, like your 500 pounds and then maybe a ton of high cal with it to try to get the high cal to maintain it, and then the gypsum to really get the solubility going early in the game?
We have not tried that. Usually, like I said, the gypsum, if we're putting it on runner ground, it's usually
right.
In May in a panic mode, and we have not tried it. I mean, it'd be nice to give it a whirl, but we have not done that.
Yeah. Now, you get the gypsum, are you putting that on in the spring, or are you putting it on in the fall?
Typically in the spring, because we try to swap ground or run new ground for the beans, and if we can do that, we'll grab gypsum at that point, because a lot of guys, they'll tell you, yeah, it's the good fertility, but you kind of know your neighbors and know some of the ground, so we kind of figure out the best attack, I guess, to try to get the crop to grow.
Yeah, sure.
So focusing in on the picture then, Bruce, those are lima beans. Are you spraying growers, or is that a fungicide in the picture? Do you remember?
That would be a mixture of both. Typically on the lima beans, we have to cover them 3 to 5 times with a fungicide. So there's usually a gallon in there every time. And we, like I said, we spray in the evening. And when these things are in full blossom, we still put the fertilizer right to them. And we do get a lot of foliage, but we've had success with the actual crop too, with the fruit on the crop. So we just put the fertilizer to it.
That's not a normal recommendation. Oh, sorry, Jim. Go ahead.
What do you know about your water, Bruce? I mean, is it hard, soft, and are you acidifying? What's that situation?
We're using all municipal water. They ran municipal water here several years ago. We hooked a 2-inch line up to it so we could fill a sprayer. So we're sticking straight with municipal water, because previously when we used well water, it was hard, and we had to use like a citrus pod to try to condition it some. But the municipal water has been noticeably better. No problems at all.
Do you think is that municipal water? You think they're pulling that out of the lake somewhere, or out of a big?
Yes, it's right out of Lake Ontario.
Is it? Okay. All right. That explains
some days,
that.
I'm telling you, I don't know if it's had much more than coming out of the lake, because it's got a wicked odor, but that's just me.
You're not too far from Toronto at that point, Lake Ontario, so we'll be terribly surprised.
Yeah.
Bruce, mixing the growers with the fungicide, do you notice any, are there any things you have to prepare for, or changes you have to make so that it doesn't get too hot?
No, what we have done is, if we're putting fungicide on, that it's such a small amount anyways, that we try to use like 20-gallon tips, and we use high pressure to make it very fine, and we try to push it right into the foliage as best as we can. So we have had no issues, and every mode of action these fungicides have is different, so they make us mix up fungicides. So we might use 3 or 4 different fungicides in the year. So we haven't found anything that's fought with it, let's put it that way.
Oh, good. Okay. Now, you said that you spray on blossom. That's not common practice, is it?
No, but if we have to spray because of a fungus issue, we just toss it in there. I'm not sure if it's cheap insurance, if we're wasting the product, but I just looked at it. If it's in the evening, the picture was taken was late in the evening, and you could see blossoms on those things, and I figured that it's got all night to absorb it, or it's there. So.
Mm-hmm. Jim, can you speak to that at all, about spraying up blossom? Do you think it's of any benefit or not?
Well, the deal that we've always talked about is that the true stress on the plant is when the blossom is fertilizing. In other words, when the bloom opens up is when the actual anthers are growing the tubules, that the pollen is going to snake down to complete pollination, and that growth of those tubules is a very high stress point for the plant. So we always felt, you had to get ahead of that. But see, as often as Bruce is out there spraying, he's hitting that time frame. Now the application of the material after the bloom is out there, because what you're trying to do is maintain as many blooms as possible. The plant is going to perpetuate itself, so it's going to recognize its stress point, and the more stress it has, the less production it's going to go into because it wants viable seed. And so that's why it's so critical to get ahead of that. Now, with Bruce, his timing has got to be such to match up with the fungicide. So what he's doing basically is putting more nutrition into the plant that might necessarily be needed by the plant, but that's the advantage of growers, in my opinion, is that if the plant is not going to use what it absorbs, it's just going to shove it right into the root zone. And see, once it gets out into the root area, the biological is going to take advantage of it. So you're going to get some feedback mechanism on that. Now, is that feedback going to be as significant as saving more ovules, in the ear or in the pod or whatever? That's up for debate. The early guys, Wilbur and Doc, felt that the biggest success was getting more ovules viable in there. So that's why that pre-bloom was really the correct time. But see, with Bruce, with a higher dollar crop like that, it's probably not hurting him at all because he's just feeding it back into the biological, which is going to eventually be in the chain that the plant can utilize. And he's actually improving the soil. See, that's the problem with rented land like that. He's really improving the vigor of the biological there, and they come along and jerk it away from him, they're going to get the advantage of that. So, but hopefully, his gross is high enough with that vegetable that he'll retrieve that, and the fact that he improved the soil, if they jerk it away from him, he's been philanthropic then. But with his situation, I just think now you start talking corn and beans, that's a whole different animal. See, that's why I think the upfront starter and it's critical in vegetables too. Don't get me wrong, but I think trying to retrieve that so that it doesn't linger on to the next renter. I think that's got some possibilities there also, but I think every guy has got to gauge that accordingly and see. I like Bruce's philosophy that he doesn't want the plant ever to be under stress, so he's just gonna feed it and not take the risk that it's coming up short at any point in time. And see, that spoon feeding, he's saying, well, he doesn't necessarily go to with a higher rate. He's using a lower amount, but that's fine because you're back to spoon feeding again, and that's the way to feed a plant. If you've got the ability to do that, and see, with vegetable guys, that's easier for them to do because they got a higher value crop there, so they got a little more money to work with than somebody that's doing corn and beans. So, he's on the right track. He's on the right track. It's the old grower's customer who got his mind warped so bad that he's thinking right, in my opinion.
What we're trying to do is with the fungus issue, even after the plant sets its fruit, is we're trying to keep the plant alive to make something happen with the fruit. And, you get some mold issues in there and the leaves start to deteriorate. If we can keep them green and growing right to the very end, that's what we're trying to do to try to make tonnage. And,
see, that's another thing to remember with the growers, that there is some sanitation value to the growers. Okay, some of the micronutrients have sanitation value. Some of the other additives have sanitation value to them also. So you are getting some sanitation on the fungus itself. And see, the idea is with that sanitation and then the invigoration with the balance of the nutrients, that the plant can recover from that. See, the big difference, it's kind of like spraying peroxide, okay, or baking soda. You you don't have any residual value to it. It doesn't penetrate and then give you value later for any fungus that's sap sucking. And see, the growers is basically the same way. But when he's out there all the time like that, that's really helping. He's having success with his fungicide, but I think the growers is helping his fungicide work better too because of the values it's got in it also. I personally think that if he just went to water, he'd see a difference from the success he's having at this point.
Well, a problem we did have is covering some of these crops that many times. You end up with nice, beautiful tram lines. I mean, you can follow them no matter what you do because you've just been through them so often. And my son doing a lot of the spraying, almost all of it, there's times where he's run out and we've left, 100 feet. Mm-hmm. And now the Cannon Factory's approach is that, see, you missed with the fungicide that time. That's why there's a difference. Now, was it the fungicide? Is it the fertilizer? I guess it depends on what your opinion is, but, we've had some test strips that we've left purposely, and, unfortunately when the harvesters come in, they come in with 6 machines and they can't weigh out that one spot, so we can't prove that we had any more tonnage or not. But when you can visually see something, something must have happened. Somehow we did something different.
Yeah, no, that's right, exactly. And see, that's really that's what gives him the confidence to do what he's doing. See, those test strips, we've been castigated for that for years, that you can't screw around with test strips because you aren't doing it as well. You don't have it statistically designed and randomized perfectly and all that. I don't buy any of that. When a guy does something and he can see the plant respond differently, I think that's very acceptable, and I think it gives a guy confidence to do some of the things he does, in my opinion. One question I got for Bruce: do you feel there's any antagonism between the growers and the fungicides that you use, or do you think it's more synergistic?
Well, that's hard to say. I mean, the jury's out on all of it, I think. I think, trying to be politically correct, the Cannon Factory or the company we grow for, they pay for the fungicide application. So, in their opinion, it's what we got to do.
Right. Right.
My belief is, give us the money that you would pay us for the fungicide application, and we'll spend it how we see fit. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I get what I get for the crop on a per ton basis. So if I spend that money foolishly and I don't get as much, it's my problem. But they won't let us do that. So they say, at this stage here, you're going to spray. They have a crop consultant come out and say, spray again. So, I think they bought into the fact that these things are helping. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Now those guys are they do your scouting for you then, Bruce, basically on that crop. In other words, are they advising you on fungicide as well as pesticides or insecticides too?
Not, they do, quote unquote, look out for the crop. But if there's an issue in the area, like leaf hoppers or something coming, they want to make sure everybody's aware of it, because the guy that doesn't spray is going to get all the friends to see him. So. They do kind of keep us in touch, but, they don't tell us, they'd say, your window's coming up, we might get those wet evenings and overnights where we're going to maybe get the white mold to kick up. You might want to spray. So that's when, like you said, we go out when it's damp and put the fungicide to it and the fertilizer.
Do they know that you're mixing it, Bruce?
Absolutely.
Interesting.
And we have suffered some grief from it, and I shouldn't say grief, just that when they make the ultimate schedule, I think there's 23 of us that grow like these lima beans, and they have a schedule that the harvesters will work in a circle, and they seem to think, our field man does, that by us putting so much foliar application to these beans, because we put 3 gallons down over 2 and down to when we plant, maybe 4, depending on how the conditions are, and then come back with basically 3 to 4 more on top. They think we keep the plant too green too long, because they've skipped us more than one time and had to come back to harvest our crop.
Mhm.
But my opinion is we're in it for us, not for their convenience.
Mhm.
So they'll
Yeah.
come back.
I think I know that they don't because it's canning, but I think if they were looking at quality, not just quantity, they'd have an entirely different opinion about your practice.
Oh, I agree 100%. But right now we're just still quantity based.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, for sure. All right, since we're coming up on quarter two, I think it'd be a good time to move into the discussion about economical means of growing corn and beans. So I'd put in the sales letter a general question. Bruce, would you like to provide a few more details? We've talked about some stuff, but I don't know how much of that you'd like to share on the call. So if you'd like to share some details about your specific situation with growing corn and beans and why you're looking for some help and some advice.
Well, just a question that I have right here for us in Western New York is less than $4 corn doesn't cash flow. Less than $8 beans doesn't work for what we have to pay for rent and the conditions we have, because our good ground does go into the vegetables, so the poorer ground gets those two crops. But I guess I'm curious personally to know, dealing with borrowed money with the bank, and our bank has been very much questioning efficiency and where can you fine tune. I think that it's more of the bank maybe being a little more nervous than they have in the past, because I don't know where else anybody can fine tune, because you were right. I mean, you tried the genetic thing, you try fungicide. I can't do anything about land rent. Right. Where else do you chip away at any of these inputs?
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. See, and I think one of the other big ones is the nitrogen rate that you're using, and growers guys are always whittling away on nitrogen rates, and so most of our guys have already got that pared down pretty darn good, and so yeah, that's an area that usually you're not going to get a whole lot of help with, and the big issue is seed. There's no doubt about you compare to 2006, and that's probably the largest percentage increase is in your genetics. And then probably the next one is going to be the weed control. In other words, when all you had to do was plant it and spray it once with Roundup, you couldn't do anything any cheaper than that. Well, we've had to go back to the pre-merges, and that's brought a significant amount of cost with it. So that's another area that I don't feel a guy can do a whole lot of screwing around with that, because if you don't get weed control, that's not going to be a good program either. So.
I want to say for anybody that wishes to speak, touch or type in *6 first, and I will unmute you. Sorry, I didn't mention that earlier.
Yeah.
I think Bruce is looking for some.
Anybody got any input that they think give Bruce some ideas? The things that I mentioned earlier is mostly the things that guys talk to me about. Is the number one is going non-GMO seed, and again, what do you do about that, Bruce? Are you using GMO seed, and then are you still trying to control mostly with pre-merge, and then use the post-emerge as your escape program?
Yes, and that does work well for us to be able to come back into the vegetables with a clean plate, so to speak.
Yeah, right.
So that's kind of what we're forced to do. But
right.
I don't think that anybody's probably stumbled across anything that's rocket science. That it's a new uncharted thing. It's just become very unique here for us. When the banking industry is critiquing things, geez, you're doing good in the vegetables. Well, what do you think you can shave on the beans and the corn? What we have done this year is we got rid of some ground that on probably a per acre basis hasn't made us much money over the years. We got rid of the poor ground.
Right.
And I guess we just got to look more at that stuff, because we get enough poor ground with the good ground. So we're going to keep shaving it off.
Yeah, no, and we see it in our neighborhood. We just had a farm sell that last fall there was one that went for like 8,500 an acre, and this one, which is not as good a ground, but it only went for half of that. And see again that it's kind of ground that's perimeter ground like you're talking about, and guys are just saying, they don't. There was no competitiveness for it. Actually, an investor group bought it. All the farmers that are around it. There was a guy that looked at it that bought right next to it, and he paid like $7,000 a couple of years ago. That's just how much it's deflated out of there because he didn't even bid on it. And when that went for like 4,900, and he didn't even put a bid in there. And geez, he's farming right across the road, and ground that isn't as good as what he was looking at. And like I said, I think he paid 7,800 for that. So I just think the whole mentality has changed quite a bit. So I guess, Zachy, we don't have any volunteers. Anybody going to tell us how to shave on the cost and make more money? The way it sounds at this point.
No, it's pretty silent out there.
So,
Bruce,
hey,
what are you
Bruce,
putting on? Oh.
Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
What are you doing for nitrogen, Bruce, on the corn?
We put it over to and down to with a planter. Put the growers on in the rows as a pop-up, and typically we strip till with a gladiator and put about 25 gallons down with a gladiator, 7-8 inches, and then we've been doing tissue samples on the corn and then coming back with Y drops at the very end of the season to try to fine tune what the corn will do.
Talk about that Y. I want you to talk about that Y drop, Bruce. Are you only doing that once, and how big is the corn?
We're doing it once, and we're doing it when we can get through with the sprayer to, not seeing a tassel yet, but it's up there shoulder high. Mm-hmm. And we're going through at that point. Last year, I think we got kind of nipped a little bit because it was so dry. I don't think the corn was able to utilize that. So I think we might have hurt ourselves because of just the weather. But typically, we've seen success doing that.
Mm-hmm. Now, have you got the regular Y drop system, or did you make one of your own?
Well, we put a Y drop system on we took our rolling coulter off our DMI knife, and we put the Y drop on there, and we can go in there when the corn's, maybe waist high and make it work. But then we just put regular drop nozzles on our sprayer and just came back with that just because spraying so much to put the Y drops on, take them off, it's just too much to try to do. And we want to keep the sprayer clean towards that time of the year when we're spraying all that fungicide and no residual. You start putting anything that looks like nitrogen on spinach and it falls over quick.
Yeah. Now, okay, when you said you just now, when you did it with the high boy, you just dropped it in the center of the row?
Yes.
You didn't actually use the Y drop on the high boy?
No, this past year, no. We put them on our like I said, in place of our rolling coulter. Mm-hmm. So we tried putting it on when it was waist high, when we could just barely get through, tip the corn a little bit. And, we tried it that way. Hoping it would carry right straight through to the end of the season, and it didn't. According to the tissue samples, we have to come back with more later. So we just put basically drop nozzles on the sprayer and drove just because trying to cover 700 acres,
right.
It was just the time factor at that point.
Right. See, they tell me with that Y drop, if you do not get that in that shadow, that water shadow of that stem, that's the only place where you really get the success.
And I believe that they're right, especially on a dry year, because we did not notice anything that happened positive.
Yep, that's right. Because we got some guys in Illinois that he said they Y dropped in some real dry dirt, but they had the Y drop system on it, and it was late in the season, like you were putting it on, and they got it right up next to the plant in that water shadow. And he said he could not believe what had happened. It had rained. And the corn yellowed up a little bit for him because there was so much water. Well, then when that water got out of there and they were able to get in there and Y drop, he said, man, that stuff greened back up faster than anything he had ever seen in his life. But they got it in that right around that stem.
And I don't think we maybe wasted all of it because we did get some late season rains, and the corn seemed to, I'm not saying come back, but it didn't,
It improved.
Yes.
Yeah, right. But it took the rain to do that. See, and his contention is, you get her over there in that water shadow, you don't need rain. The plant will get a hold of it no matter what. He thinks even as good as injecting it. And see, it's a father-son, and the father was totally opposed to the wide drop. But he said some of the things they did with it, he was quite impressed with it. So.
And we think, I shouldn't say, we're hoping, because from what little bit we did with the wide drop at the height we did, when we strip till, you're only working that little area 6 inches wide. So if you can get it over there, it seems to penetrate the ground a lot better than putting it in that hard ground between the rows.
Yep.
But out of desperation, we did it that way, and I don't think we spent the money wisely. That's all.
Yep. No, I think you read that right. I think because see the problem that I see is so many guys have been renting their applicator from where they buy their 28, and so many of these are getting rid of all that old applicator stuff. And then these guys don't want to spend the money on a new applicator, for something like you say, your DMI to inject it. And this guy in Illinois says, just tell them to wide drop it, Jim. He says that'll work fine again, the wide drop itself can be expensive, but a lot of guys are trying to fabricate their own. And Steve said the big key is you got to keep it, so that it'll spread that out into that water shadow on that stem. He said, guys are good at fabrication. He says, I'm not saying the wide drop is the only way you got to go, but he's convinced that you've got to get it in that same position to really get it to work right. And you're pretty well confirming that as far as I can see. So.
All right. Anybody else have any questions, or if you want to pipe up still, you're more than welcome. But I'll give you a few seconds, and if not, then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, Zach?
Yep.
Yeah, I have a customer made them wide drops for his sprayer for probably about $3 a row.
Whoa.
When basically the same unit is they're selling them for $300-400, and they're kind of heavy. On certain sprayers, it gets kind of heavy on the boom.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just you can make your own wide drop for relatively $3-4 a row. If you go through the time to do it, get some pipe, thread it, and then they have hoses hang off the back. But
what do they do to keep it? I mean, do they have like a Y there, like the wide drop that keeps those tubes out next to the plant?
Yeah, and then they just have a rubber hose that basically drags against the corn rows.
Right, exactly.
Rydell's the one that did it.
Oh, okay.
And then everybody else followed him. I have about 4 other people that followed him, but they do it. And there again, I think your most efficient test there is leaving strips in the field where you did it and where you didn't. And surprisingly enough, what really surprises me is how often on a good year you get just as much yield where you left your maybe you put 28% down, 15 gallons with the at planting with the pre-emerge.
Right.
And oftentimes that 45 units is enough. I mean, it's
to get the job done.
Maximum yield.
Yeah.
Right. And one thing I was thinking of there too, one of the areas as a crop consultant or whatever that I'm looking on cutting back at is a lot of the soil sampling and tissue sampling. These are relatively cheap things, but they're generally not very helpful when it comes to actually anticipating and figuring out what's going on in the field. And really, like you said, but they don't seem that expensive. They're maybe $50, and the people use the excuse, well, with these prices the way you are, you need every bushel you can get, and they sell them tissue samples and the soil samples that way. But going through a lot of them here, we had to do stock nitrates for that CSP plan. There is no consistency in them tissue samples and stock nitrates, at least the way we're doing them. The only consistent part of them is the lab fee. In fact, the fact is, my father, who put on like 50 units of nitrogen, on all 4 of his fields, he's supposed to sample that or whatever, but some of the stocks are reading about 5,000 parts of nitrogen. And I'm triple excessive at 50 units. And then, the same field sampled the same day with what I could see the same method is saying like 70 parts per million on the same stocks.
Wow.
So either I'm doing it pretty bad and it's enough work the way it is. I sure wouldn't want to do it way, make it take all day for 4 fields. But that is something I would say after going through, we probably wouldn't do that had it not been, mandated by the NRCS office. But those things, at least how we're doing them, I don't know. It hasn't been very consistent at all. I mean, when you're testing nitrogen in a season like that, you're testing a moving target. When you check it, isn't it going to be different 2 weeks from then?
Sure.
I mean, 1 inch of rain is going to change that substantially.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just a thought.
By the way, for everybody's information, Luke Griffith was talking about Rydell Nealon that built that Y drop, and I would say, looking at the maps, and maybe Luke can confirm this, that Rydell probably got the most snow of anybody out there. And if Lauren got 10 to 12, I bet Rydell's right up there in the high teens. Do you know anything about that, Luke?
I know that I don't like it, and that's miserable. But I don't even know how much we have. It's blowing around, and it's still snowing right as we're talking here now.
Yeah. Okay.
But the water's very high. It's been a pretty miserable winter here. Most of the snow had kind of receded. There's still places and groves and windbreaks and things of that nature where there's still 8-9 foot banks, but most of the snow out in the field was disappeared until the last couple of days here. So
what about power outages, Luke? I was a little concerned about Dave and Scott might lose power up there. Do you think that's a possibility, or is everybody pretty stable with that?
I guess at noon there was 70,000 people in Minnesota without power, but I didn't listen to the radio.
Know where it is.
A guy told me that on the phone, and I'm not without power. So so far so good. We'll keep our fingers crossed. Yeah,
absolutely.
But yeah, if anybody wanted to see a picture of that Y drop and how he makes or whatever, I'm sure Rydell or I could send you a picture, and I'm sure he'd be more than happy to help somebody out there. I mean,
sure.
He's kind of the one that invented it himself, as far as I know, and
right.
I had about 6-8 customers went over to his place and copied him.
Sure.
He wasn't too worried about patent infringement for helping these other people, so he didn't want a commission for showing it. So
yeah, he fits the mold very well, very well.
And he did a fair amount of nitrogen work this year too, and he was did some strips, and he was quite shocked, and some of the stuff he did too. Actually, some of the stuff that he put less nitrogen on. The corn did not look as good. It didn't have as good an appearance even when he went in with the combine, but actually, it was actually running, and I forget the actual, maybe in that 120 range versus, 100, 180, 200, actually yielded better than, and the appearance did not indicate that. It looked like it would have been less yield, but it was, I think, about 17 to 20 bushel more in that with a little less nitrogen.
That would be, if you can nail those numbers down, Luke, I think that'd be kind of interesting. A lot of guys would kind of like take a look at that if that's possible.
And he was pretty shocked by it because he said it didn't look as good. Yeah, I might have them numbers wrong there, but I do know it was yielding better, and I'm not sure about how much less he put on, but he was for sure thinking that it was going to not yield as good, and then.
Yeah, This is the same guy that moldboarded some ground and increased his bean yield quite significantly. So
Right.
he's done some
But
weird things.
They get to this point, and that's what the people selling us everything operate on is fear.
Right.
Afraid to have, and a lot of times we're too scared to cut stuff and actually learn what we need to.
Right.
And if you're lucky enough to have people that make mistakes, that's where you do most of your learning, because most people aren't going to cut something. I mean, we're indoctrinated to think that more fertilizers is more money.
Right.
Until you start taking a risk of actually, and it's seems like we can get down pretty low on the nitrogen, does it not?
Yeah, I think it, and again, realism is part of it too. Okay, when you get a perfect year, you're going to get a whale of a yield, but how many years are there going to be perfect years? See, so that's, I think that's
right.
that's something the guy's got to be realistic with himself, especially in times like this.
Thanks, Luke. That was good.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that appearance thing is consistent with what you said about the tissue testing too. It's not an accurate representation of yield or quality of crop.
And unless we're doing them totally wrong, but it hasn't been very. I think a guy would have to certainly do a lot more than what we've been doing. They just, like some of them ain't that expensive, but you get at the end of the year, like our bill for some of these labs is, getting up in there to several $1,000s, and then, the same with say a soil test. Say it comes back and you need a bunch of this fertilizer, you have somebody that's not with the growers program or whatever, you're not going to put on what they're recommending anyway. You're not going to afford it. So you could have did almost that good without even going out there and testing it.
Mm-hmm. Save that money.
Right. And sometimes what I get out of it is sometimes if I can't stick the probe in the ground, I know they need lime. To my opinion. But otherwise, I mean, you're not going to, when you get these things back, you're not going to be able to put on what they want, what you need. You're going to have to cut, and then you're just going to put on the bare minimum, say on a broadcast spread, and you could have did that sitting at home in your armchair.
Right. Exactly.
In my opinion, but it's just, to me, it seems like a waste of money.
Something I wanted to bring up, if I get time to.
Have you been a good boy?
Maybe. You guys were all talking about cutting costs, and Luke pretty much hit the nail on the head. But Doc Teagan's in the book More Food for Soil Science talks about a cornfield in Virginia and a cornfield in Ohio. Both of them yielded 100 bushel. The one in Virginia had X amount of pounds of fertilizer put on it, which was almost twice of what the one in Ohio had put on it. And the tissue test confirmed that the field in Virginia had more fertilizer put on it. But they both was 100 bushel corn yields. If you remember that, it's in the book, More Food for Soil Science. So the point that I was going to bring up is, them tissue tests, just how good are they? What are they telling us? Are they telling us anything?
Right.
He says it shows up in the test, but the yield, it did not show up in the yield, basically.
Because, Mike, what is the yield? The yield is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, sugar. See, and that's not what they're measuring when they measure that tissue test. They're assuming that tissue test being higher in those other elements is going to give you more sugar, but that doesn't always work out that way, which is what was Doc's point.
I don't have the answers to everything. I don't mean to sound like I do, but we've been farming 3 generations with this program without using a soil test to grow a crop or tissue test to grow a crop for all 3 generations, and we've been putting out some pretty good yields. And I am one of them guys growing Royal King corn. So, I mean, to say you got to spend all that money and all that time, there is a lot of it that is just simply a waste of time. That's all.
There's
Good point.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Mike's you've seen some great success growing non-GMO corn, or just at least maybe not non-GMO, but your Royal King corn and basically farming the way that your dad did.
Hey, I got a customer up there in Huntsville, Ohio, hasn't used herbicide in 24 years. He grows Royal King corn or open pollinated corn. He don't put any nitrogen on. And I tell you, when you drive by his fields, it don't look any different than his neighbors. It looks like 200 bushel corn too. He don't get 200 bushel corn, but I tell you, he gets 130 to 160 pretty consistently. And he told me here 3 years ago he had $91 an acre in his corn. He puts 3 gallon of growers on, that's it. In furrow.
No spraying, eh?
Something to think about.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. You don't need 200 bushel corn if you're not spending a lot of money to get what you do get.
Yeah,
Exactly.
All right.
It's all at night, gentlemen.
Appreciate it.
Thanks everybody for listening in. Bruce, thank you for coming on. Jim too, and for those of you that spoke up, Luke and Mike. The next call is on. Give me 1 minute. May the 9th at 9 p.m. again, and it'll be. I did know, but I don't remember at the moment.
Daniel Weaver.
Daniel Weaver, yes. Thanks, Jim. Daniel Weaver will come on. We're going. So hopefully, guys, you can listen in then. Thanks for listening tonight, and have a good night, everybody. Bye.